Hello, welcome to part 7, the final episode. Let's get animating. So welcome back. Let's look at animation in this video, as I said earlier. So what we want to do is this part here and all the corresponding parts you can see attached to it. We're going to group them in under a parent and then animate those using the parent. So I've added a circle, and now we need to just select all of these objects and then select the circle as the last object. Let's just quickly do that. There we go. And then select the circle empty. And with that done, press Ctrl P, bring up the parent menu, and you can select object or object keep transform, either or. So now with that, you can select the circle empty and just rotate it on that axis. And you can see that's the Y axis of the circle. That's the one we're going to animate. Let's split our viewport and add a timeline. Thanks, buddy. And let's set this to 60 FPS. I change it to 100 as well, just to make sure we don't get too much of we don't want a 2K render. I just want to do this in HD. So let's set some keyframes. So working on the basis of 60 frames per second, you can do 60 times 6, and that will give you 360 in the timeline, as you can see there. Okay. So first keyframe, on the first frame I should say, we're going to add a keyframe on the Y-axis, you can see there. So you can click directly into this, or right click and do insert single keyframe. So it only keyframes the Y-axis. And then let's jump to the last frame. In fact, the last frame plus 1. And then in this one, we can type in any value. Let's start with 360. Again, right click, insert single keyframe. Now you have a bog standard animation, but you'll notice it slowly accelerates out and then speeds up and then slows down again. That's because it's not using a non-linear, if I can say that, interpolation. So to change that, move your mouse pointer over the timeline and press T. I'm just going to increase the revolutions before we do that on the last keyframe. Yeah, that's better. So let's, as I said, move your mouse pointer over the timeline, press the letter T, and then select linear. And that will change the interpolation mode. Now there's a constant speed from start to finish. Perfect. In fact, it still slows down a bit there. The reason it's done that is because you notice the yellow keyframes at the end are the only ones selected. So I have to select all of them by pressing A and doing that again. So, and there you go. Now we have linear animation. Great, that's all we need to do. And just to explain that the reason I did the 361 frame is so that the first and 360 frame aren't exactly the same. So move it past the 360, add one more frame, add your keyframes there. So now what we want to do is, we've got all these multiple objects as you can see in the outliner. So I'm going to add an empty cube and just roughly scale that to fit the proportions of the ray gun. So it doesn't have to be accurate as long as it's relatively where you want it, or where you want it to rotate from anyway. So something like that is absolutely fine. Now you want to select all of the objects and then make sure the cube, again like the circle, is selected last, and that should be the yellow or orange object. And before I do that, actually I'm just going to deselect the parts that we've already got parented to the circle, just in case that messes anything up. So I'm going to hold down Control and click these a couple of times so that they're deselected. A little bit fiddly, but we get there. There we go. So the only thing we have selected is the empty, the circle that we added earlier. And with that, we can select the cube last, and again, Control P and parent to object. So now we've got a parent-child relationship 2 levels deep. Very nice. I like. Cheers, Borat. So there you go. You can just select the cube, rotate it, and off we go. So how did I create the scene, the final render? Very straightforward. All you want to do is just point the camera effectively at the object, of course, and have the animate the empty cube. So I'm just going through here and changing some parameters, making sure transparent is on, transparent glass, very important. Color management is set to filmic, high contrast. And that gives you that lovely look there. I'm going to reset the camera position and rotation so that we're looking at it face on down the y-axis. And with that, we can select the empty cube, which is of course parented. Sorry, all the objects are parented to. And we can rotate that 90 degrees. So it's facing in that direction. And with that, obviously the camera is too near, so we can pull that back a little bit. And this is a neat trick I like to do, is to add another plane axis empty, or just a plane axis empty. Rename it to something like cam look at, or camera look at, camera target. And then go into the constraints and add a track 2 to the camera and select the cam look at empty we just created. And that makes sure that the camera is always looking at that particular point in space. So if I move the empty now, you can see the camera view at the top there. The camera adjusts its view accordingly. So this is good. It's a good start. So I'm going to fast forward through most of this because a lot of it is just tweaking. So the problem I had is as I rotated the cube around, again, very basic animation, keyframe 1 at frame 1, and then on 360 or 361, and then I skipped to frame 361 and rotated it on the z-axis 360, and then you can obviously increase that to whatever value you like. So let's add another keyframe at 361. And again, as it says there, that just avoids the first frame and the last frame being exactly the same. As you can see there, about 361. So the first frame is the same, not the same as the last one. And once more, hover your mouse pointer over the timeline. Make sure all of the keyframes are selected by pressing A, like that. And then hit the T key, select linear. So yeah, you may have noticed that the grip, you can just see there, it's just coming out of the frame. So this is where it gets a little bit fiddly. So feel free to either zoom the camera out even further, and that will just eliminate that issue. But instead, I chose to leave the camera where it is, and instead I added another empty, which then I chose to basically animate where the camera is looking as well. So I did another keyframe there. So you can see there I'm making slight adjustments to where the camera is looking to keep everything in frame. And I move the camera back a little bit more. And that's looking almost there, or pretty much there now. As I say, you could just move the camera back, well back, and that should be absolutely fine. And there you can see in the graph editor for that empty, I'm going to make those Bezier or linear, depending on what you want to do there, the timing of that. As you see there, I added more keyframes to the empty, so the camera is always keeping the ray gun nicely in place in the view in the frame, really. So that's pretty much it, guys. Very straightforward, but it's just a bit fiddly. If you do appreciate my videos, a like and subscribe would be hugely appreciated. Thank you. So let's talk about the rest of the scene now. Once you're happy with the animation, I then added a plane and rotated that by 90 degrees, and obviously I've scaled it up quite large. If you do that in object mode, do make sure to apply the scale with Control A. And I pushed the plane back further away from the ray gun, so I didn't want any like shadows interacting with it. And I'm going to use this image that you've seen before in the other videos to color pick the background. So I played around with some of the colors to see which one works best. I decided this aqua green color is pretty cool, works well with the orange, so I went with that and made some changes to the principled BSDF. Gave it a high roughness value. We don't want any shine or that kind of thing, we just want a plain background. I then added an area light and I copied the camera look at empty, renamed it to light look at, and gave the area light a track to constraint again, and made it look at the light target. So as I move the light around, it always looks at that particular point, which is just a lot easier. So basically the principle is here, as I add the lights, keep an eye on the camera view, because I'm looking at that and looking at where the highlights are hitting the object. That's my meter really, in terms of, does it look good there? And there's pretty good. You can see some of the highlights just coming from the top left of the ray gun. So it helps to highlight the glass object and the body overall. So it's quite happy with that. Again, play around with the position, the size of the light and the strength, and get the look that you're after. So I duplicated that light and moved it somewhere almost opposite side and made it a much warmer color, like an orangey yellow. There you go, it's like an orange yellow. Not as powerful as the first light I added. You can see there we've got this nice catch light at the bottom of the ray gun now. So I'll continue making these tweaks. Make any adjustments as you feel are needed. So I'm just going to rotate the empty cube for the ray gun just a little bit further down, just so it's not as extreme, the rotation. That's pretty good. That frames it a bit nicer. And I've moved the camera lookout object a little bit more, just to get a nicely framed animation there. So with the background plane, I'm just turning off some of the ray visibility there, and adjusting some of the render parameters again, making sure that these are all good. I've turned motion blur on. So at this point I did one test render, which you can see here, just to see how the animation motion blur actually is looking. It's very subtle. So what I'm going to do is increase the value of the rotation on the last frame. So instead of 1080, I increased it to 1344. So that makes it effectively spin faster, which results in a better, more extreme motion blur, as you can see there. So I'm happy with that, and I think that's what I went for in the final render. So I'm just going to change the max samples to 512. Feel free to use a lower option. I went for full global illumination just to see, because it didn't take that long to render. As you can see, 16 seconds per frame, which was fine. And I also moved the needle to a different rotation for a bit more interest. And that's the result, guys. I hope you enjoyed that. I had a great time making this. I'll see you in the next video. I've got something very different in the next one, so make sure you like and subscribe. I'll see you then. Bye for now.